as follows. I am to inform you that on Thursday, the 12th of November 2020, Her Excellency the Governor General received from the returning officer for the constituency of St. George North the writ which has been issued for a by-election in that constituency, certifying the election in the poll held on Wednesday, the 11th of November 2020, of Miss Tony Nicole Sherry-Ann Moore to serve as a member of the House of Assembly for the said constituency of St. George North. The oath of allegiance required by Section 59 of the Constitution and Section 62 of the Representation of the People Act, Chapter 12, was taken by Ms. Tony Nicole Sherry-Ann Moore on Monday, 16th November 2020, before His Excellency, the Acting Governor General. Yours faithfully, Cecile Humphrey, Cabinet Secretary. I am also to announce that Miss Tony Nicole Sherry-Ann Moore of 117 Woodburn Park in the parish of St. Philip in this island did sign the Declaration of Qualification and did swear the oath of allegiance as is required for a member to sit in this honorable house. I now therefore invite her to take her seat in this honorable chamber. Could you kindly stand, Ms. Moore? Tony Nicole Sherry-Ann Moore, it is my duty and my pleasure to welcome you to this honorable House of Assembly. I am sure that you have gained some experience from the other place, but in this chamber, there are lots of rules and lots of pitfalls. I hope that you will take great care in learning the proceedings of this House, and I hope that you will contribute to the debates generally that take place in this chamber. Thank you. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my comments this morning are brief but full of warmth and emotion. For us on this side, this represents a number of things. First and foremost, we are happy to welcome the Honourable Member for St. George North. I feel very good saying that, to this honourable chamber, and I trust and pray that her representation of the people of St. George North will cause the confidence in her to have them return her over and over and over and over to this honorable chamber. I am equally very, very humbled but happy that this election of the honorable member for St. George North represents the reunification of two entities that have not been together for 65 years in terms of working together. And I refer specifically to the fact that the honorable member is the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. Her predecessors would have served in every instance on both sides of this honorable chamber, and we therefore welcome her once again. We welcome her as the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union to the parliamentary party of the Barbados Labour Party. We are conscious that there will be moments when her duty to the labor movement will take preeminence over anything else. And I start this session by making that point very clear. That is what we expect of her. That is what we require. We believe that the public requires of her. And her decision to work with us is one that is rooted in the same philosophical concerns and beliefs, but it is equally one that we recognize that requires her to be steadfast as the resolution of 1971 of the same Barbados Workers Union would have reflected when the then General Secretary was assuming a position on a party that is not represented in this honorable chamber today, but is still very much represented in the body politic of this country, and I refer specifically to the Democratic Labour Party. So with those few words, I welcome the honorable member for St. George North. I look forward to robust debate from her. I look forward to her helping us to carry the heavy lifting that we now as a country face, and I am very confident that the people of St. George North will be happy with her performance anytime they are required to ask again what is their view and how shall they vote. I believe that her work over the course of whatever period of time is left in this term shall commend her to them once more. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honorary member for St. George North. I apologize. Honorary member for St. Michael West. Please turn on your mic.
Thank you, sir. There are about 80-something of us on this side who I would also like to join in expression of welcome to the newest member to this chamber, the honorable member for St. George North. And certainly personally, I would like to offer again in this public space congratulations to her. Must indeed be a memorable occasion for herself and husband and family. And long may that memory live and last with her. I can't say I recall my first moments of sitting in this chamber. I was reflecting on that when the honorable member entered. I don't even remember where I sat. I remember with whom I sat then, but I don't actually remember where I sat. Certainly, these circumstances today would be memorable for her. What I do recall of my own experience is that more importantly than where I sat was the sense of purpose with which I sat then. It's a sense of purpose with which and in which I'm still sustained today. And my prayer for the honorable member would be that that would be her experience. The purpose with which she strode into this chamber today would long live with her, and that she would valiantly serve that purpose. Political platforms give the opportunity for all kinds of statements, some memorable and some better forgotten, and some wholesome and some not so wholesome. And I say publicly what I've said to the honorable member privately, that ultimately judgment is not established in the critiquing tongues, especially of opponents or even of supporters. It is found more so in the manner in which you conduct yourself as you seek to serve. And I'm sure you will find and fulfill the proper way in doing so. And ultimately, it is to be found in the courts of heaven. And I'm sure the honorable member understands that. So as you seek to serve, I will advise you today in this public space. And I will not say stay the course. That might be a little bit of misguidance. But I'll say, I'll say to you, stay focused and keep the faith as you pursue the battle. Thank you.
Honourable member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I address you in the good name of the people of St. George North. I also address you in the name of workers of Barbados and their families. It is indeed a proud moment as I stand here with the confidence and in the confidence given to me by the people of St. George North to speak on their behalf, yet to speak more widely as the voice of working class people and their families at a time in our development where that voice is very much needed. I reflect this morning that it was about 26 years ago that Labour had such an opportunity to be in the House of Assembly. Perhaps some may argue that it was by choice that Labour left the House of Assembly, but it is easily recognized what was driving the choice at that time, and it is very instructive that the same reasons that caused Labour to leave are the very reasons that have invited Labour back. That is the need for Labour to have a voice, the need for that voice to be heard as we seek to uplift our people at a time that is very critical in our history, a crisis period. Our growth path will not only benefit or must not only see Labour reduced to being calculators of severance payments, which has been something that is easily observed for the past few months. Our growth path demands that Labour has voice and that that voice is fully expressed in the decision-making of this House, this chamber, and other places. I'm so proud, therefore, to stand here, Mr. Speaker, committing to continue working with you. You, Mr. Speaker, have worked with me very well over the past 6 weeks, and I look forward to working with you and others as we commit to putting Barbados first. Putting Barbados first rejects as a norm that resources must be used just to uplift a few. Putting Barbados first requires that resources, our brain resources, our financial resources, our social resources are put to best use for the upliftment of our people. So yes, at a time when a crisis has highlighted a number of cracks in our system, I stand here honored today and see it as a tremendous responsibility that not only I myself have, but that all honorable members in this House have, to avoid the temptation, as the honorable leader of the opposition said, to ignore the critics, because we must be ever mindful of the critics, because it's in listening and deciding that we will not push dissenting voices in the background that we are ever conscious of the mandate and the commitment that we have and the work that we have to do within this honorable House. Instead, honorable leader of the opposition, it will be used as an opportunity, my experience and my time here, to convert those who are willing to be converted to that better way, including the honorable member. So my call, therefore, in these few words this morning is for us to remain focused as we go about the business of the people who've put us here. And while joining you this morning in this honorable House increases the spotlight on all of us, I am sure that we are committed to that responsibility of upholding our democracy, our justice, and the social engineering that is required at this time. So I thank you all. I thank you for your warm welcome. I take this opportunity also to thank those members of my family who are representative of that extended family that rallied behind me and who have journeyed with me from a baby even up onto this point. I thank my union family as well for the support that they have given. And Mr. Speaker, I don't want to let emotions overtake this morning. So with these few words, I am obliged.
Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General.
10th of November 2020, reference number GG 2S1A Volume 2. Dear Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to inform that I shall be away from office during the period 14th to 21st November 2020 on vacation leave. In accordance with the provisions of Section 29, Subsection 1, Subsection A of the Constitution, Sir Kenneth Rudolph Hewitt, KACBE, BJH, will perform the functions of the Office of Governor General during my absence. As the Honorable the House of Assembly will not be meeting prior to the start of my vacation leave, it will not be possible for the usual formal messages to be sent to your chamber. Will you therefore please bring my absence formally to the attention of the Honorable the House of Assembly when next it meets? I have the honor to be yours faithfully, Governor General.
Petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of...
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorary members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The Speaker, we now turn to appointment of the election of the Deputy Speaker.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure all are aware of the vacancy that has been created with the position of Deputy Speaker by the election of the Honourable Member for St. George North. And as a consequence, I beg to move that the position be filled by the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest.
I'd like to second that.
The question is that the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest be elected as Deputy Speaker. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The honorable member for the constituency of St. Michael Northwest is elected as the Deputy Speaker.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 2. In the name of the Honorable Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 228, the compulsory acquisition by the Crown of parcels of land situate at Gemswick in the parish of St. Philip in this island, owned by Balmoral Investment Limited and leased to Grantley Adams International Airport, Inc., for the public purpose, namely in public safety and national security.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me begin by saying that this is the area well known to us all called Rock Hall. An area, Mr. Speaker, that has had a significant settlement of, let me call those without title, for some time. And prior to that, it was used many years ago as a landfill. And what has happened over the years is after that landfill was no longer in use as a landfill, people started to put up houses on that land. There are almost 200 and something odd houses there, and clearly this is unacceptable to have that number of people living on what was a landfill. It is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, for several reasons. The first reason it's unacceptable is because of the health problems associated. Now, a landfill will give off for many, many years after it is not used as a landfill, a gas called methane. And methane has significant health problems associated with it. And I'm going to refer, and I'll make this a document of the House, the dangers of methane gas poisoning and exposure to methane. Methane, Mr. Speaker, can cause things like rapid breathing, increased heart rate, clumsiness, dizziness, decreased vision, euphoria, decreased alertness, loss of memory, weakness, fatigue, emotional responses, nausea, vomiting, fainting, collapse, convulsions, coma, and death. So, but that is just one gas that a landfill gives off. In addition to methane, a landfill will also give off hydrogen sulfide, which is another gas that comes from the degradation of the garbage over the years. That also has significant health problems to people who may be living or residing or inhale hydrogen sulfide over long periods of time. And it gives off another gas called radon. Radon, a third gas, Mr. Speaker, that has significant health problems, is linked to leukemia, is linked to prostate cancer, is linked to microcytic anemia, is linked to other forms of megalocytic leukemias, and significant problems. That is from the health point of view. Adjacent to this area is as well an old area that was also used as a dump that has significant particulate matter. And that can also give rise to inhalation problems and lung problems. Health problems, even if we assume or consider nothing else, there is absolutely no reason that hundreds of people should be living on top of a landfill. Let us then look at the fact that this landfill is the proximity of it to the Grantley Adams International Airport. Second reason why it should not be there. Should you have a fire at that site, Mr. Speaker, it means all of the smoke, all of the dislocation, all of the security problems associated with being adjacent to the Grantley Adams International Airport. You imagine if you have a fire there and the wind blows from the east all the way to the west, you have to close down the runway because it would be full of smoke. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the methane not only being a risk to your health, but it itself is a combustible gas. and risks of explosion. When I met with the fire officer, Mr. Speaker, the fire officer told me that is a disaster waiting to happen. It is a significant problem that we have to address. That's the second reason that we have to relocate people from the landfill. The third reason that we have to relocate people from that landfill, Mr. Speaker, is not only from the point of view of the health of them, not only from the point of view of the security risks and explosion, but in addition to that, the fact that the landfill was filled just on soil, it means that the structures themselves are at risk of falling in to the landfill in areas where the soil has not been properly compacted, not proper foundations in the area. The whole structure themselves are at risk. The foundations are poor. Risk to life and limb to the people of that area. So when we as a government assessed all of those problems, assessed the problems associated with the radar and the pilots saying that they have difficulties sometimes with the radar coming onto the runway, assess the risk of if there's an issue with a plane overshooting the runway because it's right at the end of the runway. All of these things coming together, Mr. Speaker, the government has made an absolute and conscious decision, knowing full well that we have to protect our people, knowing full well that we have to protect our installations, knowing full well that we have a duty and a responsibility to keep our people safe. We have no choice other than to relocate the people who live on that landfill. And part of that relocation process requires us to acquire the land currently owned by Balmoral Investments. And that is why we are here today, Mr. Speaker. So we are going through the process. We have done everything required for the land acquisition, and we are asking for the support of this House, bearing in mind all of the problems associated, bearing in mind all of the risks associated, bearing in mind that we have to protect our people, that we acquire this land and relocate these residents as a matter of urgency. You know, Mr. Speaker, when I contemplated this, I asked myself, if we had a fire there and just one person died, what is the value of one person's life? What is the value of one person becoming ill because of inhalation of gases? What is the cost of staying in hospital for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months if you have burn injuries or cancer or whatever? The cost, the Minister of Health will tell you, is about $30,000 per month per person. Per person. Can we as a government sustain that for hundreds of people? And how does that then displace the other person that needs acute medical attention as well? So we as a government must do everything to mitigate risks and to reduce expenses and to understand and look to the future and see how we can mitigate the problems that may come with these kinds of settlements. So I ask, Mr. Speaker, bearing all of those risks, bearing all of the health issues, bearing all of the security issues, bearing all of the risks to our installations and our institutions, having concept and ideas that every single life matters and every single life is important and that we cannot put a price on one life. That person that lost their life, if a tragedy happened, could have been the next Rihanna, could have been the next person inventing something to take Barbados to the international scale. And let me make it clear, those that inhale methane and radon are more at risk are the children that live there. So we have a duty and we have a responsibility. And I could not imagine with any conscience that any person in this house could be against the acquisition of this land and the relocation of those people to someplace better. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged and ask that this matter do now pass.
I'd like to second that.
Honorable Mr. Michael West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The power of acquisition given to a government in our context is an awesome power. It is a power which justifiably, over the years, around which some people have developed a measure, a sense of fear, a little bit of trepidation, especially when there has been some speculation that their properties may be acquired for whatever purpose. I say that to say this. I believe that any government has a responsibility to do whatever is required to make citizens and residents as comfortable as possible in their own space. And over the years, we have had instances where the Acquisition Act has been used, and in the minds of many, to the detriment of those who have been subject to such acquisition. So that power is an awesome one. I say so simply to encourage the Honorable Member for Christchurch West, the Honorable Minister now responsible for housing, to do his very best to ensure that when this power has to be executed in the interests of public, that the actions of the government are such that people are left in no doubt as to the fact that land and property is being acquired for good public purpose, and that there's no other motivating factor driving such an action. Akin to that reality, the abuse of that power from time to time, even if only in the minds of many or in the minds of some, is the issue of compensation for properties acquired by the state for public interest. And the stories have been myriad, one or two of them legend, as to how government has taken excessively long periods of time to compensate people relative to acquisition of their properties, even though some of these matters have been settled at the level of the court. As a legal person, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you're well aware of these happenings. That action is taken in the interest of John Public. The courts make their rulings. Action should ensue in the interest of those who are complaining. Compensation should be made. And the years roll by, and that compensation is not given. Minister of Housing must see it as his responsibility to persuade his colleagues in finance that the decisions of this court must be respected and the rights of citizens must be highly regarded, and that compensation should be given in suitably appropriate timeframes, such as people do not feel aggrieved that government is taking advantage of their situation. We had one recent case in which a citizen of this country is saying that after 25 years, we're now getting some movement on a matter like this. And even the movement which is this belatedly is not appropriately what was anticipated. And all during that time, that individual is alleging that they have had to pay taxes to the government on property under the control of government for purposes pursued by the government 25 years ago. Compensation only now coming in 2020. That is entirely unacceptable. I know this honorable minister to be a man of action and a man of integrity, and I impress upon him to do his very best to persuade his colleagues, especially those who are responsible for finances, to ensure that people are properly compensated and that the authority of government with respect to these matters is not in any way abused. Minister gave several good reasons as to why these folks have to be moved from where they're currently located. One of them related to health. He expressed some particular concerns about the threat to their own health and to public health, and especially to the health of children. And if you're living on what was originally a landfill, which has not been properly or scientifically sealed or closed, and even in that instance where it has been, you're still exposed to all of those chemical negatives to which he, with his knowledge and research, has referred. And you're facing a serious situation. My question is, has any study, these people have been there for a while. These people have been there for a while. Has any study been conducted, or has any study even been contemplated to test, to research whether or not there are any particular ailments, specific ailments emanating from the fact that these people have been living on this place on a dump, as was said, for such a long period of time? Because it's not sufficient to say that it is ill-advised to set up house on a dump because of the threat to your well-being, physical well-being. I think you have to go the next step. And if people have been there for a while, and in these numbers, as is being reported, then somebody has to check to see whether or not there are any particular public health problems which may already be in existence and associated with the fact that they are there. I think that is important. Health and well-being of the nation is something to which this government is giving some primary consideration and a focus of serious concern. And therefore, I just wonder whether or not any kind of investigation, scientific inquiry has been conducted to test whether or not there are any particular issues relative to public health which may already have arisen from the fact that they are there. The other reason the Honourable Minister gave, of course, is the threat to airport facilities and air travel, and this is understandable. And if you're responding to that, then it is very advisable that so you must, because you do not want to create a situation where any action resulting or any event taking place around the airport of a emergency nature is complicated or made worse because of the presence of persons living illegally within close precincts and proximity to the airport facility and to the movement of aircraft. So we support that. Do not think, however, that a government of this quality should leave it to an instance where pressures from outside regarding requirements for international standards being applied at your airport facility should be the thing that drives you to action. It can't be that everything we do simply because the international regulatory framework is such that if we don't, we suffer some detriment or penalty as a result of that. So I would like to know that the posture is more proactive than it is one which is responsive to any pressure coming as a result of requirements for acceptable air travel standards and airport standards in Barbados. But we support that reason. The other squatters in Barbados, and I can't sit down before I ask about them. And if the honorable member for St. Michael East were here sitting next to me, as he likes to do these days, I think he would want for me to raise that question as to what of the squatters at Bellevue and that's a growing squatting community. You are the honorable representative, Mr. Speaker, for St. Michael Central. And you know that community is expanding even as we speak, and it's coming out of Bellevue, and it's now encroaching upon almost Station Hill precincts. You've already lost a whole recreational space at Station Hill and Lower Waterford as a result of the expanding squatters community. So what are these folks? I've said before, and I'd say it again, that I think squatting is not simply a manifestation of recklessness and disregard for law. It may be in some instances, but squatting is also a manifestation of a sense of dispossession and a sense of disenfranchisement by people who feel we can do no better. And we're left to this cause because the government is not in a position, for various reasons, to facilitate our aspirations, our hopes of owning our own property, of building a house, of constructing a dwelling. And so we feel that we must do something to take care of our families. And I believe squatting is not simply a reflection of disorderly behavior or illegal activity. It is a clear manifestation that people feel a sense of being dispossessed, a sense of being disenfranchised. And they're looking for help. They're looking for an option. They're looking for alternatives out of their particular situation of misery. Again, I say, I know this honorable minister to be a man of action, and that this squatting problem in Barbados will get his attention beyond Rock Hall or Gemswick or whatever is the proper name. And on behalf of yourself, sir, and on behalf of your members of St. Michael East, I ask humbly, but with confidence, that some attention be paid to the matter of squatting elsewhere, especially in places at Bellevue and Station Hill. And while he's at it, they want 2 areas in St. Michael West where there's small squatting, very small squatting communities. And if they can be helped, we very much would appreciate that. As well, you're familiar with St. Michael West, Mr. Speaker, and you know, want 2 little areas around the Bank Hall area and elsewhere where we have some small squatting settlements. And I simply ask that we recognize that people are saying we need some space, we need our own space. This is what we feel we must do. And in those instances, that a requisite response may be made with respect to that matter. The honorable minister, when he made his submission, also made reference to the fact that because this is a site formerly used as a dump, means that some of these buildings are constructed on very frail and fragile, vulnerable foundations. And I wonder, again, if any specific engineering study has been made to ascertain the level of threat, the level of danger that really exists. I say that, Mr. Speaker, with the incident at Arch Court, vividly in my mind, where we had a collapse of an apartment building and the death of family members in a cave, in a cavern at Arch Court. So when the minister says we've constructed houses at Rock Hall and Gemswick on a dump and the foundation is not good for such, and some of those dwellings are fairly sizable and of concrete, then does the government have any responsibility at all to do any kind of engineering study? There's one guy in Barbados who is very publicly offering his engineering skills to the whole of Barbados. And you might be able to make use of those skills in this particular context. And very seriously, to ascertain whether or not we are facing any kind of immediate threat which would result in loss of limb and life. The minister himself said the loss of one life is one too many, and I support that. But I support the acquisition with the knowledge I have of the situation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable, you turn off your microphone, please. Honorable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This resolution, as a land resolution, housing resolution, effectively gives honorable members an opportunity to speak in terms of housing policy and social land policy and a bit about social policy, although I would not go as wide, Mr. Speaker, as has been done in previous debates. Land and housing has always been and will continue to be one of the primary challenges of a state, a developing small island state such as is our country. And our citizens, our constituents have legitimate rights for acquisition of land and housing. We know from early on that the ideal is, to acquire a piece of the rock within our country. And there's always tremendous pressure on the political leaders, the members of parliament, to make available land and housing for our constituents. I dare say that most of us, if not all of us, would agree that employment, of course, in terms of jobs, just sustenance of our constituents, and housing is one of the priorities as well, and one of the main requests we get from our constituents. The reality of the situation is that there is no government, there's no political administration that can fulfill the expectations, legitimate expectations of all of our people for acquisition of house and land. We have to, I suppose, though, do our best that we can do. I know that this political administration, sir, is trying its best. I mean, within, of course, the context of COVID. I know last year, I think it might have been around November, the Honorable Prime Minister would have led a forum at the Lloyd Erskine Sandyford, which many of us attended, sir, in terms of coming up with a new framework for construction of affordable houses in Barbados for our constituents, and a lot of the private sector and developers were there as well. I believe, sir, the Ministry of Housing is continuing with that and trying to get progression in place in terms of those affordable cost housing, $160,000, $180,000 maybe, whereby people can afford those houses. One of the problems, of course, we have, those as a country and a society, is access to financing, your purchase and acquisition of land and houses between the banking institutions, financial institutions, and credit unions. And that is key. I know, sir, again, that this administration is looking at that. I mean, I think that the high point of that came in the last administration of the Barbados Labour Party in the late 90s, early part of this century, when, ironically, sir, the immediate former honourable member for St. George North was Minister of Housing, and the Barbados mortgage finance portfolios was in place, because this would have been put there, sir, on the basic realization that a government, a political administration, and through its housing agency, the National Housing Corporation, cannot get anywhere in terms of fulfilling the legitimate desires of our citizens to own a house. And you have to have assistance in this regard from the private sector developers, and you have to be able to incentivize these developers, for example, and the people to be able to build affordable housing. So I look forward, sir, to that development again, government in association with the private sector in terms of supplying affordable housing to our people and access to the financing of it. One of the realities, sir, as we all know, sir, as representatives of the people, is that we have a policy, at least the banking institutions in a large measure have a policy that they would not lend, or they will be extremely skeptical to lend long-term land and housing policy acquisition loans to people who are not appointed in their jobs, whether in terms of government sector and mainly that or private sector. And therefore the government's recent thrust to appoint over 3,000 public servants and make sure that those who were in temporary positions, the positions become permanent, they're appointed, is all tied in this regard, because those persons would now have greater power and leeway in going to financial institutions to acquire houses. One of the issues here, sir, is to determine exactly or roughly about how many persons in Barbados do really require housing and lands now and are asking for an opportunity to get them. I mean, when I was deputy chairman and acting chairman of the National Housing Corporation like 20 years ago, sir, I believe the list certainly was over 20,000 for persons who, over a period of time, would have enlisted with that corporation in terms of wishing access to purchase land or housing, or to rent land and housing. Some of those are obviously may have died, sir, would have died. Some would have acquired housing some other way, some would have emigrated, and therefore it is incumbent on the Ministry of Housing, National Housing Corporation, to try to obtain a rough figure on how many persons still require housing. The reality is that in any given year or so, maybe a government could realistically provide 1,000 housing solutions. I mean, even that maybe stretching it. I know at one time, I believe under the last Barbados Labour Party administration, there was a time when you were aiming for about 2,500 housing solutions through government each year. That was never realized. It's virtually impossible, sir, for a state institution to do that. And we have to face this reality and engage with the private sector more. It could be a case, as I know was a concept in the last Barbados Labour Party administration, whereby permissions granted to property developers to develop land for housing purposes, or generally, for property development purposes, provision or as part of the condition, town planning application and permission would be that you had to identify particular areas within the development whereby lower income housing or middle income housing could also be obtained. And that is a concept that we may have to look at again, sir, as well. The issue, sir, of housing for persons with disabilities is obviously, sir, a challenge that any government such as this one, which is caring and which recognizes that a country is only as strong as its most vulnerable persons, has to engage in terms of thought process. Again, under the last Barbados Labour Party administration, we would have had white and then green papers on improving the lives of persons with disabilities, and those papers came up with a figure of about 10% of state housing for persons with disabilities. That has never been realized. That will always be a challenge as well. I know it happened in some areas, I believe in where some of the state housing was reserved for persons with disabilities. That, of course, is connected to other social issues in terms of making jobs available for persons with disabilities, again, in terms tied in with their education and training, so that they can pay the necessary rent, even if it is subsidized a bit. But these are all issues, sir. I know that the main focus now is security of our people in a COVID environment, security in terms of health, the physical, in terms of the economic security. But these are all issues that we also have to look at in terms of the policy, housing policy of the ministry. We had moved to high-rise housing rather than single houses, obviously allowing for the creation of more space. And the minister could perhaps say whether that is still a policy of his ministry. I'm sure it probably is, because you're getting more space, but also, of course, there are some who oppose that concept, or at least have doubts on it, because you don't want to create building blocks which house a lot of persons. It has to be tied in with an environmental thrust, green spaces thrust, which again, of course, this political administration is very keen to pursue. The Honorable Prime Minister spoke up to yesterday about the administration's intention to pursue Golden Square as a green space for the people of this country. So, sir, the housing and land acquisition and for our people and availability of it is clearly a tremendous social challenge. The state cannot provide all the needs, and I think the people of Barbados have to realize that. But government must do its best still to incentivize the private sector and property developers to join with us in allowing the creation of more land and housing solutions for our people. The banks, the financial institutions have to play a part in this. I know that the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, before he became Minister of Housing, has, in this same Parliament, sir, been very critical of those institutions in terms of their policies. It's a case where I suppose you have to work with them. I myself, sir, am not happy. Yes, I commend them for earlier this year agreeing with us, agreeing with this administration that they would waive payment of mortgages and payment of housing loans for a period of time. I don't know whether it was 3 months. I believe it was extended to 6 months in most cases. But then the bank still appeared to want to add on interest onto those arrears of payments, which they had agreed to waive earlier on. I don't think that is right, sir. I know they will say that they've taken a cut in all the debt reprofiling that we have been through, sir. But the reality is that we all have to look out for each other, and it can't be a situation where capitalism or the corporate arm of society is greedy, because everybody has to be in this together. And a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and we have to look at how those who are struggling in terms of their employment and in terms of general day-to-day living because of COVID, sir, with the government doing the best it can do in all the circumstances, better than the vast majority of countries in the world. And the financial institutions have to, in my submission, come on board and see how they can assist in this regard. We have heard for a long time, sir, about reverse mortgages. That concept and philosophy has been an ideal, certainly, of this political party in past manifestos, sir. It is something that certainly I would like to see come to realization, and perhaps the honourable member for Christchurch West could speak in terms of where that may be at, because we know, sir, that there are a lot of older people in our country who are, as we call it, asset rich, but in terms of income or finances, they may be poor. And that this is certainly not a novel concept. This is a concept that has worked in many other countries in the world, and it is something that the financial institutions of this country need to be able to get on board with, so that our senior citizens, our elderly population, who obviously are some of our most vulnerable, subject to health challenges and physical and other disabilities, can very well benefit from. So I know that I believe the Barbados Association for Retired Persons has also spoken in terms of that philosophy and that policy. This government, sir, has to be commended for earlier this term reducing the ultimate rate of land taxes for those who are most vulnerable, those who own properties below $800,000 in value, sir. I know that those above that rate, sir, have had to pay a great increase in land taxes, but that is a substantial increase in land taxes, but that is social policy. And it will not always be so, sir. But the reality of the situation is that those who could least afford that their rate and the quantum of land taxes came down. And obviously, sir, the municipal solid waste tax, this government has opposition marched against that and would have been primary. I think the trade unions, I believe, marched as well. In that would have been primary responsible for the reversal of that regressive policy by the last government in terms of taxes on land. We have a responsibility as a government, sir, to try to keep housing prices down. I think we have been able to manage that as best as we can in a situation where we don't have controls, actual legislative controls on housing or on rents. We allow market forces to operate, but this clearly is an issue that a political administration must be aware of. And finally, sir, in terms, of course, this is a compulsory acquisition resolution. I agree certainly, sir, with the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, who spoke in terms of compensation for persons whose property is acquired. It is something, sir, that I've spoken of, certainly as an opposition member, the need for adequate and speedy compensation for persons whose property is acquired under the Land Acquisition Act for public purposes, sir, as is allowed. It is an act that I believe came into effect in the mid-60s, around our independence, maybe just before or just after. It is a fundamental act, one that has to be there on our statute books, giving a political administration that authority. But the reality is, sir, that yes, both political parties that have formed the government since adult suffrage, since independence in this country, have not been as diligent as we ought to have been in granting compensation to persons whose properties have been acquired. I'm aware, sir, that I'm not so sure of the figure, the amount owed at present, but I know that this government has been making serious attempts to reduce the amount of monies owed to persons for their compulsory acquisition of their property, sir, as we ought to. The BRET program, of course, speaks towards payment of debt owed by government to its citizens, and I know that progress is being made in that regard to reduce that financial obligation of the political administration towards its people and its citizens. These are just some areas which we face as a government in terms of challenges, but certainly I would support the resolution, any resolution such as this, which advances the land and housing solutions of our people, which, as I've said, sir, is one of the primary challenges facing any government of this country. And the public could be assured that while this government, as any government, will not be able to fulfill as many housing solutions for our people as we would like in the real world, we will continue to do our best. The reality of the situation, sir, is that even those countries such as those in Scandinavia, Sweden, and those others that have recognizably the most outstanding social policies in the world, those countries have not been able, by a long stretch, to provide affordable housing to the majority of their people and housing solutions. They've done better than other developed countries in that regard, but still they have not been able as a state to do that. And they've been able to join in the case of Sweden, for example, with private property developers and have programs where the private property developers have been involved in such, which is something, as I said, that this administration is doing. Yeah, I know. So, sir, we will, as I said, continue to do our best in terms of compulsory acquisition and provision of housing solutions for persons such as those in this case who have to be recited. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honorable Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm obliged to the honorable member for speaking so widely on the issue of social policy as it relates to housing solutions. I won't have to go there, but I wish to center my comments around the public purpose for which the resolution is being pursued, namely the purpose of enhancing public safety and national security. As the resolution was being presented to this honorable chamber by the honorable member for Christchurch West, I took note of the fact that there was significant emphasis being given to the risk associated with where people are currently located and the need, therefore, to mitigate against those risks. I took note of the need to protect our people. And it is in taking note of the tremendous risk associated with having people live on a dump site or near a dump that I could not help but relate it to the issue that some others are experiencing, very similar issues that some others are experiencing. And I speak of the situation where there are residents in another area, members of our community, of our country in another area, living very close to a dump site, where the characteristics and the risks imposed are very similar, and where residents are being caused significant unease. Unease not only because of the smell, but because of everything that we are discussing here this morning and that the resolution seeks to address, the risks to the health of a community. I could not help but take note of the passion as expressed in the concern if one person, imagine the cost if one person dies, and the cost of people therefore suffering acute medical conditions as a consequence of where they live. And I therefore could not help but to utilize this opportunity for us to give attention not only therefore to the residents at Rock Hall that the resolution addresses, but also the residents at Laura State, where the conditions almost mirror directly a number of the conditions that we're seeking to address here. And whilst the issue of land acquisition or compulsory land acquisition may not always be practicable to address the concerns that we have or to address the solutions that will have to be put in place, what it signals is the need for very careful and deliberate and strategic and unhesitant action to address these concerns before they get out of hand and before they get to the point where compulsory acquisition and relocation of residents may have to become necessary. And the concerns that would give that the residents of Rock Hall or the squatters at Rock Hall, if we would rather, may have relating to health are very much the concerns that will be present in other areas. I speak of concerns from people who have asthma and other respiratory issues, people who would have concerns with how the conditions around them, not imposed by them, are impacting their skin and their health generally. And as I rise to support this resolution, I am mindful of the fact that every single life matters and every single person matters. I know that there was mention being made of squatting and how it is expanded in a number of different areas. I don't think that this is only an urban phenomenon, Mr. Speaker. I think that squatting and the need for housing solution is a national phenomenon. And the conditions, therefore, that give rise to this resolution are not conditions that anyone should recognize as being unique to the Rock Hall area as far as housing solutions, but as far as the health and safety of residents. And so I support the resolution on that ground. I also recognize the need for responsibility in making citizens and residents more comfortable in their space. And whilst this resolution addresses public safety, within the realm of public safety, I think consideration can also be given to the conditions that many would have to endure in situations where they are on Zone 1, located in Zone 1 areas. And therefore, the need and responsibility of a government to address these concerns or to position these concerns that individuals will have within their housing solutions. I speak specifically when I make mention of people who are living on Zone 1, there is the natural consequence that people will end up using pit toilets. Because if they're in a Zone 1 area, there's all the implications of contamination of the water and so on, and then the sewage issues that pertain that will inhibit or prohibit, rather, individuals from being able to have some of the basic amenities that many of us are able to enjoy. And in speaking to that as a cause for relocation, I could not help, as the honorable member for Christchurch West was making the presentation on the resolution, to think of the need for relocating some other members, residents, not only because it is a public safety, but it is a health and safety concern of individuals and their families living in a particular area. And I cast my mind very easily to previous acquisitions, such as the acquisition at Hamlin, an acquisition that was made not only to facilitate housing, but to relocate individuals so that they can enjoy conditions that are safer and are therefore more healthy conditions to live in and to raise a family within. I also think of that relocation because it was one that would permit for road improvement to address road safety concerns as well. And in speaking of that and recognizing that, I have to venture into an examination of why it takes us as long as it does, having acquired pieces of land, to make the necessary payments for it and to pursue the objectives as outlined in the Hamlin case, the Hamlin land case of housing and relocation. Because I easily asked this chamber to recall that these were lands that were acquired from as far back as 2002, almost 2 decades ago. And we still have a situation where residents are uncomfortably living in Zone 1 areas where they not only have to be using pit toilets, but have to be drawing water from a standpipe up a hill to their houses on a daily basis. And therefore, where the health concerns of these residents are significantly compromised. So as I conclude my statement before this House in support of the resolution before it, I urge us to reflect on the fact that yes, every single life matters. I urge us to reflect on the fact that We need to protect our people. I urge us to reflect on the fact that if one person dies or if one person is injured, that's a cost that no one of us will want to carry for ourselves. And as we support this resolution, it's not one that will cause any divide or should not cause any divide by us, because the objectives that are being pursued ought to be very clear to all of us. But as we pursue this, it is for us to be conscious that this is but one of many areas of concern that would need to be addressed. And not only the areas that I mentioned, but as we go around this country, the evidence of squatting and the consequences of squatting are consequences that none of us, I'm sure, are blind to, and that all of us should see the need to pursue the solutions that would counteract the risk that a number of people and their families, particularly children, are coming up against. So I just thought I would add my 2 cents on this first occasion that I have to speak on a land acquisition issue in this House, to highlight that the issues that concern us in this resolution are far-reaching across this country, and a number of these issues are already issues within our attention that have been brought to national attention, and to urge similar support as we move very swiftly towards solutions to ameliorate and address these very vexing issues for our people. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First, let me say it is a great pleasure and an honor of mine to be able to follow the new member for St. George North on her maiden speech. And I am sure that she will make many, many wonderful contributions to this honorable chamber. Let me first start with the acquisitions that the member for the Leave Opposition spoke about. Yes, acquisitions are a problem. Both administrations in the past are guilty of acquiring people's land and taking a long time to pay. In fact, one of the chief agencies that has contributed to that problem is the ministry that I used to be the minister of, Ministry of Transport Works and Maintenance, that acquired lands for road improvements and so on and so forth. But let me tell you that we are working to get that matter addressed. And I cannot suppose what Cabinet will do, but certainly in the ministry, we are putting things together to get that matter of all of those land acquisitions over the years addressed as quickly as possible. The honourable member also talked about, in particular, I guess he was mentioning Licorice Village and the Bell and those sorts of areas. And I also work with the Cabinet Subcommittee on the Sewerage System, formerly with the former member for Christchurch East, now with the member for the current Minister of Transport Works and Maintenance. And I can tell you that we are very advanced as well in putting together a plan and hopefully executing that plan very quickly for a sewer system, be it by reverse osmosis or however we decide to do it, for sewering that area of the Bell. So it is garnering the attention of the government, and we are looking to get that matter resolved, the matter that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition spoke about. The Honourable Member also spoke about studies being done. Well, I can tell the Honourable Member very clearly, we don't need, as much as I do appreciate that having scientific and empirical evidence with T testing and hypothesis testing of T's and so on is important. I am not aware of any clinical studies like that were done, but I know from all the other evidence that you do not want people living in close proximity or on a landfill. I give you Health studies related to landfill gas exposure. That is one. Science Daily, living near a landfill can damage your health. Health and environmental risks of residents living close to a landfill, environmental research and public health research. Of course,
I remember you're going to make them documents to
that's
the
why
house.
I'm making them here, all of them here. And the dangers of methane gas poisoning and exposure. All of these studies show very clearly you do not want a person living on a landfill because of all of the problems associated with that and all of the studies associated. Further, this actually, the proximity to the asbestos dump, which is right next door, which gives rise to mesothelioma, is another reason why we don't want that at all. With respect to the honourable member for St. James North, the database cleanup that the member spoke of, we're actively pursuing that in terms of people being called. You may have seen the public service announcements. The National Housing Corporation has engaged, I think it is 5 young people that are calling people to make sure those who have found a housing solution, those who have not, who are still pursuing, who've passed away, and cleaning that whole database so that we're well aware as to exactly who needs, who doesn't need, and where we are with respect to who is on the database. These houses that are there, Mr. Speaker, were built without planning permission. So a lot of them don't have running water, don't have, and that is a big problem in a COVID environment, you would appreciate, don't have electricity, don't have a proper sewage system, and don't have, no roads, no foundations, nothing at all. So it's a significant problem, and it needs cleaning up. And we are absolutely focused and determined to get this cleanup done. I could inform the Honourable Chamber that we've in fact already built a prototype. I'm just waiting for the Honourable Prime Minister to come and visit and give her approval, fingers crossed. And once she gives her approval, I am well prepared and ready to start building out those houses, to get those people relocated, and to get this whole area cleaned up as quickly as possible. It is, thank you, members. It's been going on for too long, decades. And now is the time. Now is the time to take this, face the problem, as the former Prime Minister would have said, face the problem and fix the problem. I am convinced we now have a solution. We have the places to position the people. We have the capability, we have the ability, we have the technology, and all we have to do now is execute. Honourable members, I would ask that this resolution do now pass.
The question is that this resolution do now pass. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Number 3, sir. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee to consider the grant of sums of money for the service of this item. Oh, yeah, sorry. Sir, before we do that, we to revert to government notices to give notice of that said resolution.
Correct. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to give notice of a resolution to grant the sum of $49,865,928 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020-2021 as shown in supplementary estimates number 7, 2020-2021.
Revert to government business, sir. Order number 3. In the name of the Honourable Leader of the House, to move that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee to consider the grant of money for the service of this item.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
I beg to move, Mr. Speaker, that you do not leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair. The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee.
In the name of the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the passing of a resolution to grant the sum of $49,865,928 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020 to 2021 as shown in the supplementary estimates number 7, 2020 to 2021, which form the schedule to the resolution. Head 13, Prime Minister's Office, in the amount of $22,500,000.
Honorable Member for St. Michael Northeast.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I do not intend to detain you long, but the matters that are before this honorable chamber for supplementing the resources of the various programs in the Prime Minister's office are largely as a result of COVID in the first instance. On the 20th of March 2020, I stood here and announced, as we closed off the estimates, an amount of money for the Adopt a Family program. We knew that we would need to be able to significantly supplement the resources of a number of persons across our country as a result of them not working or, in some instances, having lost their jobs, persons in their families, rather, having lost their jobs. Many of them were required to rely on welfare, and we realized that we needed to have a program that put together funds from both the public and private sources in order to ensure that Barbadians could keep their heads above water. 2020 has not been easy. In many other parts of the world and in various media, it has been described in all kinds of ways, too varied and some too inappropriate for me to use in the language in the Honorable Chamber of Parliament. But suffice it to say that it has been difficult. We have already been told that there were over 75,000 claims on unemployment benefit, 30-something thousand people, but the actual number of claims would have represented multiple claims for some persons. Some were fortunate and only were there during the period of lockdown. There are others who, however, whose families continue to be under tremendous pressure. And I want first and foremost to thank ordinary Barbadians who donated over $1 million to supplement what the government had put on the table. I want equally to thank those charitable trusts across the nation who have made a difference over the course of the last 15 years in particular, when the specter of charitable and philanthropic institutions have truly stepped up to the plate to close the gap in Barbados. And there are a number of charities with which we are now all familiar because they have literally helped so many hundreds of families across this nation. And I refer to the Barbados Children's Trust, the Sandy Lane Trust, the Maria Holder Memorial Trust, just to name a few, the Eden Lodge Trust, Charitable Trust, just to name a few. And these charitable entities have added to the effort of the government in trying to keep people's heads above water. When I first spoke, I made the point that the most important thing is for people to be standing in 2021, 1 year from when I spoke in March. The majority of persons are standing. In this battle against COVID, we have lost 7 Barbadians. In the last debate, we spoke about 1 loss being too many. It is equally too many with respect to this pandemic. But it isn't only those who succumb ultimately to the pandemic that we are concerned about. It is also those whose circumstances have been severely impacted as a result of the pandemic. Not necessarily from a public health perspective, but entities or people that they may have been relying on are no longer in a position to be able to assist some of the families that are there. There are persons who may have been working as gardeners. There are persons who may have been working as around persons' households. There are persons who may have been working as seamstresses. There are all kinds of professions. There are farmers who may have had secure markets before, but who, because of the reduction in the number of visitors coming to the country, have not been able to supply their goods and produce in the same way as they were before because of the diminution in demand as a result of the reduction in travel numbers to Barbados. So we find ourselves having, as a government, to deal with 2 conditions. One, an implosion of the private economy that has taken place, largely driven by the massive impact on the tourism sector and its consequential its consequences upon other sectors in our society, be it the farming community, the manufacturing community, be it on employment, be it on transport, coaches, tour buses, be it in attractions. And then we also find ourselves treating to the reality of additional acute pressure on philanthropic organizations who, while filling the space over the course of the last 15 years, would never have had the kind of pressure that they would probably be facing today now as a result of what has happened in COVID. This, were it not for the fact that it is a global event, would have caused even greater psychological stress than it is doing. But the reality is that because it is happening globally, there is an understanding on the part of those who might otherwise be less sympathetic and more insistent on executing programs to assure them of their rights in the circumstances. And to whom do I refer? Specifically banks, specifically financial institutions, specifically landlords. And while there have been some difficult stories that we have had to intervene on, for the most part, there has been a willingness to work with people, recognizing that the circumstances into which people find themselves is literally beyond their control and beyond the control of the government or of the region or indeed now of the global community. It is against this background that the first sum of money, therefore, that is being requested of this committee is $10 million to literally cover us for the balance of the fiscal year. The first $10 million took us to October. Even as we moved around St. George last week, there were persons who reminded me incessantly that this $600 a month made the difference between them being able to live or not live, and that they were hopeful that the program has not come to an end, as they had been told by, obviously, officials who were unaware that we were planning to come to Cabinet and to Parliament for an additional $10 million to cover us for the next 6 months of the year, literally from November 1st to next 5 months of the year, to March 31st. And therefore, I'm asking this honorable committee to agree to this sum of money to allow us to have a seamless continuation of the funds to be delivered to the families. The general rule is if you are drawing unemployment benefit, you will not benefit from the $600 a month. And it's very simple. As I said in recent times, this government must first deal with needs before it can deal with wants. And we deal with needs in order to ensure that next year, this time, that all who are standing now as far as possible will be standing as a result of our being able as a people to hold each other up, recognizing that the government is the one entity with the greatest girth now, especially with the implosion of the private economy and especially with the additional pressure on the charitable organizations. Having said that, I want to salute the Sandy Lane Trust for the significant sum of money that they have put in vouchers in every part of this country, without reference to any kind of other considerations. And I do believe that those families would want me to say thank you to them on their behalf, because those vouchers have made a significant difference in the ability of families to keep their heads above water. This is not different from what is happening in the United Kingdom or Canada or the United States of America, where other established charities have had to step into the void in order to help close the gap. The notion that there are tens of millions of people unemployed in the US really has been a leveler. And when people say that COVID is a leveler at all levels. It levels countries, it levels human beings, it levels everybody. Because none of us is immune from the reach of COVID, either from the public health reach or indeed from what has now become the economic reach, which, if we didn't know through literature what the Great Depression was like, we know it firsthand from our experience today. And I keep making the point that the resilience of our people is what is going to get us through. And why? Because I know that it was the resilience of our grandparents and great-grandparents that got them through. And they started that battle from a much lower point than the one from which we started today. We will continue to make the case for the fiscal policy room and the trade policy room and the general policy room for us to do the things that are necessary. And I want Barbadians to remember that when you hear us talk about trade policy, it's not because we're trying to talk above anybody's head or to be fancy about it, but we talk about it because at the end of the day, whether you can grow vegetables and not have the prices undermined by imports comes down to trade policy. At the end of the day, if you're growing carrots and string beans and cabbage, you want to know that you can secure a market for it and not have the supermarkets or other entities be able to import and sell at next kin to nothing goods that they're importing because they're coming from a country that is subsidizing their own agricultural production in a way that we have not been able to do as a small island state. And these things matter. And when people ask about the size of the cabinet, that is why the Honourable Member for St. James South has responsibility for these issues, because it will determine whether people in St. George or St. Philip or St. Lucie or St. Michael, with the Lear's Land Lease program coming, will be able to produce vegetables on a profitable basis without it being undermined by produce that comes from outside to undermine the prices. I say that while talking about the Adopt a Family program deliberately, because as we help families with this program, I want families to also help themselves. And I want Barbadians to return to that, because that was part of the resilience that allowed our grandparents and great-grandparents to get where they got. The notion of children taking out stock is more than just having lamb to eat when the day comes. It is about the discipline of knowing what it is to take care of a living organism, a living animal, and having to be responsible regardless of whatever else you have to do, homework, eating, going to school, going to play, whatever else persons have to do. Those children then have an obligation still to go and take out the stock and bring back in. In some instances, it's cows. In some instances, it is sheep. I'm trying to get, especially across the urban corridor, more and more Barbadian families owning sheep, raising sheep. Why? Because black belly sheep at the end of the day has a better health profile for us, as you know, Madam Chair, as a practitioner of medicine, than even New Zealand lamb, because there's less fat content. And to that extent, when the Minister of Agriculture speaks about us wanting to have 1 million black belly sheep being reared in this country, it is because we believe that that then can become something that the Minister of Manufacturing can be proud of with respect to agro-processing and perhaps labeling it. I threw out the name Triple B, only because it was in my head for years talking about Triple B, Bajan black belly. You understand? And whatever it is, we can come up with that name or a different name, but we need a name to brand it so that people know that this special meat from Barbados, Bajan black belly sheep, is a delicacy. And while others may try to produce it, just as flying fish is our own, and there's a project that I'm now working with the Minister of Maritime Affairs and Blue Economy and the private fishermen on to see how best we can deal with the reality that sargassum weed has literally caused problems for our fishermen to be able to access flying fish, because instead of the flying fish spawning by the side of the boats, the sargassum weed is carrying the flying fish down deep into the ocean, and the currents are then moving the fish, so that there are issues as to why we haven't seen the level of catch that we're going on. Believe you me, I'm not trying to digress too much, but believe you me, I need our families to take responsibility in the way that they can. Those families that want to have access to lambs, I am going to ask the same Adopt a Family unit to be able to make sure that we can give people access to lambs so that they can do it and give them that start off. And obviously it won't be 100 lambs. You may get 2 or 3 lambs to start, but it is a start for you to go. And we will also work with those who want to get into backyard farming. I am adamant that we need a new unit in government that focuses on transforming behavior. Government Information Service is about communication. But I need a Department of Public Affairs that is going to help us transform behavior. How do you plant string beans? How do you plant herbs as opposed to carrots, as opposed to sweet potatoes? Do I need to have an open field to plant sweet potatoes, or can I plant them in something that literally in my backyard in terms of canvas bags and that kind of thing? At the end of the day, you cut the canvas at the bottom and pull out the sweet potatoes. There are a whole host of master classes that we can do for our people, for these same families, the Adopt a Family program, so that as they come through this, they come through with greater skills than they went into it, while the government at the same time is supporting them and helping them move from day to day to eat. We will continue the philanthropic drive. We are conscious that not everyone is in a position to do it, but those of us who earn a little more than the rest, I ask us to remember, especially as we move into the end of the year, now is the time to give. The spirit of Christmas is what? Spirit of giving. And that really and truly, I want to appeal to Barbadians to remember that this program is here. It is being managed by public officials, so you need not worry. The accountability is there. It will come to Parliament. But in the meantime, we believe that government has the primary responsibility to put another $10 million in place to carry us to the end of March. The second part of the program, Madam Chair, is one that I am adamant that we must put on the agenda and achieve over the course of the next 7 years. I keep going back to the address that I made on the 2nd of January 2020 because it was not a light address. I spent the Christmas season reflecting on what was the message that I wanted to send Barbadians in the year 2020. I did not know that we would be reminded of its critical importance as a result of the pandemic. And it is even more necessary for us to achieve it, for us to become world class, for us to be that place. As we discussed yesterday evening as we finished with the movement of Nelson, where our people can be counted as among the most educated and culturally sensitive people in the entire world of any nation. Our people can become world class in every respect. If we want to have these lofty aspirations, then we've got to fix some things home at us first. And one of the few things that need to be fixed is the notion that we are going to let the 4th decade of the 21st century come with people in Barbados with pit toilets. This Barbados Labour Party government has not come just to talk across the world or to do the other things. Those are done in order to give us the policy space as I just described just now. But I am forever rooted that our primary responsibility is to uplift Barbadians regardless of their circumstances from the level that they're at to the next level. And the most difficult level for us to reason with in our heads, to understand how does a country reach 54 years and still have 4,000 odd pit toilets on its landscape. I say to you that the time has come for us to treat this as a special project. We were hoping as a government to get the funding in a special loan. It has not yet come through, but I'm not going to let this government wait any longer before we start the battle to eliminate pit toilets from the landscape of Barbados. We also recognize that it is critical that work be created for small contractors and tradesmen in this country, and who, at the end of the day, also have families that they must feed. And if we can therefore help them while helping us to obliterate from our landscape that presence of pit toilets, then we would have achieved both objectives with this simple allocation. As a result, I think we are all agreed that the majority of pit toilets are in fact in the urban corridor because of settlements that have come in, but we have learned that there are a number of them in the rural areas as well. And in many instances, what has been disturbing to me is that the progress made in the past has literally, in some instances, been reversed in the last decade. And there were a lot of people who, for whatever reason, because they were not working in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and you become big men and women and you can't live in the same house without quarreling and fighting, and family look at you and say, look, you go and build something outside there because you can't live in this house with me. I love you, but you can't live out here with me. And they then send them outside to build something. Or, in some instances, the separation was not as pleasant as that, in which case they go and try to find somewhere, no job, they get an odd job, they go and get some wood, they get something, and they build a little shanty, for want of a better phrase. And let us not deny it. We know it happens in every constituency across this country. But I've seen far more of them this time round in government than I've ever seen when the last time we were there, because the last time we were there, most of the pit toilets related to houses that had them for decades. What we're now seeing is pit toilets that have come about in the last decade or so. And that is what is disturbing. And that is what has caused me to know that this government cannot ignore it, because if we ignore it, what we're going to see is a continued increase rather than a reduction in the numbers. So we are committed every year, and I'm committed now. There are a few things that we have done as a government to commit. The trust loan is one of them. This is another one of them. We're doing this in the midst of an IMF program, but we're doing this because at the end of the day, the quality of life of ordinary Barbadians matter. And if we start to understand why is there the social decay that is taking place in this country, we will start to recognize that all of these things add up towards it. Is this going to, in and of itself, solve the problems and stem the social decay? Not alone. But it is one of the critical things that must be done to bring back dignity. A day like today and yesterday, the rain falling all day, all night, all day, all night. And you have older people who have helped build this country, and this is what they're going to have to rely on to go outside, and next thing you know, they fall down and break a hip. And next thing you know, it's another problem that they're facing, and in some instances, their life is at risk. Let's look at it from the younger people perspective. You've got young kids. They're frightened necessarily now in today's age. There is more shame because social media has created this alter ego that I find difficult to understand sometimes. But everything is about show. And these kids now may not want to bring home people by them because they know that if they want to go to the bathroom, they only got to put toilet in at them. There's all kinds of things going on. And I am not giving no Bajan no more extra luggage to carry on the shoulder or no quarries to carry on the shoulder. So let's deal with it, get it out the way. It's going to take 5, 6, 7 years, depending on the fiscal space that we have, in order to put this behind us. But it must now be seen as a priority for the Ministry of Finance to provide these funds, because in the same way that we started to set about obliterating the tenantry roads that were mud and rock and stone, as the last Barbados Labour Party government did, where we put in a whole host of paved roads across this country, across rural and urban Barbados, in a way that has allowed people to be able to get to their houses, to have ambulance and other emergency vehicles, get closer to them, for them not to walk with plastic bags and 2 and 3 pairs of shoes because of these circumstances. And while that is not fully finished, we have come a long way from when I came into public life in 1989 in this country, from where we were in 1989. I hope that in 7 years from now, we can say that the only reason anybody has a pit toilet is because they went and dig one the week before. And that in truth and in fact, we become a country that literally works with persons to ensure that this is not part and parcel of the legacy that an independent Barbados gives them to move into the next generation. So with those words, I'd like to ask for $5 million for the Rural Development Program, Commission, and $7.5 million for the Urban Development Commission. I anticipate before the beginning of the next fiscal year that we will have the National Development Commission, and integrating the two of these with a rural and an urban component. We are doing it because it makes no sense to us to have 2 separate HR departments, 2 separate finance departments, 2 separate IT departments, when in truth and in fact we can consolidate the 2 institutions as one, but still leave them with their mandates in terms of rural Barbados and urban Barbados, so that there is not that lack of appreciation for the difference between the 2 entities. Parish like, and a constituency like St. George North and St. James South and St. James Central, you all define, and even St. Michael Northeast, my own constituency, has elements of both urban and rural in it, and therefore we continue to be guided by the boundaries in the legislation. But equally, we recognize that the urban stretch is moving above that highway mark more and more, and therefore we may have to do some slight tweaking to how we treat to it, because Charro Bridge is as urban as they get now in Glebe is as urban as they get in St. George now, in terms of the services that it provides, the town center that it really is for Central Barbados. So we're mindful of those things, but a National Development Commission that is intended to treat to the development issues of households and communities in a focused way that is not yet captured in any other state-owned enterprise that we have. Madam Chair, with those few words, I beg to move that Head 13 stand part, and that it finds favor with the members of this honorable committee, as I believe that these sums of money will make a significant difference to tens of thousands of households in the remaining part of this fiscal year, from the point of view of the Adopt a Family program, but also from the point of view of the hundreds of people that will benefit, we hope, ultimately from the pit toilet, the eradication of pit toilets in our country. I'm obliged to you, ma'am.
Honorable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wish to add my gratitude to the supplementaries here today, and in particular, I want to focus on the Adopt a Families project, where over 4,000, almost 4,000 persons have been the recipients of the debit cards, and that project had run for 3 months. And then when we recognized that COVID is still with us, it had been extended to 6 months. And it means that the injection of the $9.9 million, almost $10 million into this project will help to go a long way in helping to ease the suffering of those many thousands of recipients and others who would not have fitted the profile at that time, when we acknowledge how so many other persons, especially in the tourism sector and others, are now on the breadline, having received their benefits long time ago, and they have already been dried up. And so I believe that the 10.364 million that was expended between May and the late September, having seen that it is gone, because many of the persons I meet every day, sometimes I get 300 WhatsApp messages and calls, and the hotlines are still going at the ministry and at the household mitigation unit, because persons have used up their funds. And so I am really strong support, but I would not want to overlook the outstanding contributions of those various agencies, Barbadians in the diaspora, locals, and the various charities, Corporate Barbados, and individuals who have sought to inject funding into these projects to make a difference in the lives of Barbadians. I also want to indicate, ma'am, that many thousands of people having benefited have not been persons who have been identified by us in any way that is political, but because of the interviews and the assessments that were done, not only through the mitigation unit, but indeed our social workers and others on the ground, as well as individuals who called in to indicate my neighbor is falling through the cracks. What help can I get? And those assessments were made with the social workers going into the homes. We were able to get a better idea as to what is actually happening now. And there's nothing worse in the world, ma'am, to reach this stage in our development when Christmas is now so bleak for so many thousands of families in Barbados and indeed in the world. And so any injection of funds to have this project extended is welcomed, because we know that the people feel it. All of us here as parliamentarians and those others out there who are interested see every day and learn every day of the suffering that is taking place. Nothing that we have ever experienced of foreparents did during the war and in other times. But this is the first time in my life, and I'm not 10 years old, or 50 years, or 60. I have surpassed that now, thank God. But I'm saying it's the first time in my life, and being an individual always on the ground and in everybody's face, it's the first time I've ever experienced this kind of suffering beyond natural sicknesses. And so there is a need for this injection to be put in place. And I want to thank the Honorable Prime Minister and her team for giving us the privilege to be able to see an extension of the project to lend that element of hope to all Barbadians who are now suffering at this time, to give them an element of hope that they will be able to go forward. I know that there are many faith-based groups, community groups, Corporate Barbados, who came on board when the COVID pandemic struck, and they too injected many gifts, the hand sanitizers, the masks, foodstuffs, other items that would have been able to keep Barbados alive. And therefore, I think it is incumbent upon me, having had all of those donations, all of those benefactors coming in to help those beneficiaries, I think it is only fitting that I laud the excellent performance of the Ministry of Health and the frontliners in helping us to be able to stabilize in our country the spread of COVID in the way that we are seeing it in the international world, where countries have so many billions of dollars and every day their numbers are climbing. So I want to congratulate the Honorable Minister and other ministers in the various stakeholder ministries that have worked assiduously over the time of COVID to be able to stabilize our country. I also want ma'am to indicate that volunteers did an excellent job. We know that the National Assistance Board had its own challenges, but thousands of volunteers called in. Many persons came to assist because our most vulnerable also include our senior citizens who are suffering in some way or another. And I want to congratulate those volunteers and those community-based organizations that made those efforts to be able to help us. I also want, Madam Chair, to indicate that yes, people are still falling through the cracks. All of us see it. The churches, the faith-based groups, other institutions are seeing it, and families are feeling it more than ever. And so challenges in the year 2020, where there's stark poverty in some households. It would have been bad before, but COVID has made it worse. People can't get food in the way that they would like. Amenities, the light, the water, well, the telephone, that is important too, but they have now lost a lot of the resources. Yes, there was a commitment from the entities responsible that they will give a stay of allowing the lights to be kept on, that the water will be reconnected, and so on and so forth. But there are still challenges. Some people's own have been taken off. And therefore, we have to empathize with them, because this new generation has grown so accustomed to all of those amenities, and rightly so, because the only way our children can use the tablets in the schools and in other institutions, or the only way that we can work from home, especially if we are so impoverished, is if we have those amenities still up and running. And so housing has become another big problem. There are so many landlords. And I'm not going to say they're unscrupulous at all. Some of them are. But there are many landlords who have sent out eviction notices or have evicted persons. And it is sad, and unfortunately so, but I acknowledge that there are some landlords who rely on the funds in order to pay their own mortgages, and so they might have done what they had to do. But my biggest concern is that families have been turning away their own. And I do not in any way support individuals having to display elements of high disrespect for older persons in our society. And so some children have been disrespectful to their parents, so they've turned them away. And when they turn them away, where are they going to go? The Ministry of People Empowerment and the Ministry of Housing and Land, Rural and Urban, have not got any houses. The last administration gave away the houses, and we understand. And therefore, there are limited spaces to provide, and that's the reason why the Honorable Minister of Health and his team are now saddled with an additional 25 senior citizens who are not going back home because family don't want them back, or the conditions under which they live is so perilous. And so there are myriad challenges that we are facing in this society. But I want to thank those landlords and landladies and other persons who have given shelter to individuals and families, because at the end of the day, we need to be humanitarian in whatever we do. We can't say we love God whom we cannot see, but here's our brothers and sisters whom we can see. And therefore, I laud those efforts of those individuals, and I plead with those families that have been taken in or given a chance with the reprieve from having to pay the rent, to show utmost respect for those families and individuals who have given them an extra lien on life, at least on life. And it is hurtful when we look at human dignity and see the level that many persons have dropped. And it's not only working class people. There are some middle class people who are just not making it. The banks and the credit unions are zeroing in on them, and many of them are nervous. And if they choose to call me whom they do not know, to lay it out, and they hear the crying and the pleading, it says we really need to get on board and make sure at least that there is food and that measures are put in place to ease those persons who are suffering in those various ways. There's nothing more discomforting than to work hard for years and then you have only 2 more years to pay your mortgage, and because you have been unemployed due to COVID, due to the scaling down of employment, that you now are on the brink of losing the only thing that you might have worked so hard and made so many sacrifices to hold on to, the house that you and your family are living in. And I'm pleading with the agencies to give those persons who are in that, we call it as a major word, pocketary, in that particular situation, an extra period of time to help them to gather, to help them to be able to rely on other family members, at least to put together an amount of the funds to be able to keep the shelter over their heads. Barbados is small, we don't have space to facilitate all these people who have been displaced, unfortunately, but I rely on the judgment of those business entities to help Barbadians to continue to have a new lease on life. I also want, before I close, Madam Chair, to indicate that the Welfare Department had been given an additional 10 million for this financial year, and it is probably it's on the brink of exhaustion, because the Welfare Department has been working over the past months to be able to meet those needs of Barbadians who are falling through the cracks, as well as to cater to those persons who received the services before. And it is extremely challenging for them to be able to achieve those goals of serving Barbadians as a whole. And so these fundings will help. And I want to laud those efforts of Barbadians who are caught right in the midst of the COVID, and the impact that it's having on them have determined we are resilient people. And we're going to put up our little wayside kiosks, or we're going to make masks, or we're going to make some bread, or we're going to sell whatever to be able to keep our heads above water. We have always had resilient people in Barbados. When our parents had to work in the agricultural belt, they made sure that they did a little sowing. They made sure that whatever produce they had in the little plot that they rented from the plantations, that they took it to Bridgetown or wherever, Spikestown, wherever, on a Saturday morning to make sales to be able to bring in. But you know what is best about Barbadians? The whole approach of the barter system. I go pumpkins, you go potatoes, we give, we share. And what saved our generation was the shopkeepers who would have allowed us to be able to what we call trust and pay back the money the next week or whenever funds were made available. We don't have those anymore as far as I can recall, and therefore we need to get back to the life that helps us. I want to commend the Honorable Prime Minister because of the vision that she has in relation to families who are so disadvantaged, families who are so impoverished that they are now building the shanties onto their families' houses and so. But I encourage families again, pool the resources. You can't be there with your partner living on the same land, using up the water or whatever is in that household that is in front of yours or behind yours, and then not putting in something to help pay the light bill, or not speaking to your mother, or not bringing in your bag and somebody else who has the sugar, and pool. That is what we all knew as proud Barbadians. And therefore I encourage them to continue to do so, because we have identified families in our poverty project, sometimes 15 and 20 people. And it's not only urban Barbados, rural Barbados has got some of them as well, and they're all falling through the cracks. So I encourage the pooling of the resources and helping to heal broken families. And as I conclude, ma'am, I want to say that I am from the generation where the 4-H movement encouraged every community to grow something, to make something, to do something meaningful that will help to build the government and the families. And it is unfortunate we have so many secondary schools that have got space. St. George Secondary is doing an excellent job. Grantley Adams is doing an excellent job with the animal husbandry and all that. I know that Lester Vaughan is now beginning to get back on his feet, but there's so many others, and we need to incorporate agriculture into whatever we are doing, because that is all that will help to sustain us. We can feed ourselves, we can reduce that import bill on food to make the difference. And so Barbadians have been strong, they have been resilient, they used to raise their own animals. I did. I know what it is like to milk the cow when they kick down the whole bucket of milk. I know what it's like to carry out the sheep and graze it along the road, and now we have to go and plant back hedgerow and all that to be able to build back Barbados and save topsoil from running away. I know what it is like to be putting my money into the Bright Star Lodge that I can get new shoes to start up the new school year, otherwise crap will smoke my pipe. And so we were resilient, we were industrious, we were hardworking, proud Barbadians. And I encourage others to join in that and make the difference. The pride and industry, the dignity towards work, thrift, feeding ourselves and in our villages, that still is extremely important. And I want to indicate, ma'am, again, how I have given my support not only to this aspect of the supplementary, but indeed for the one with the pit toilets that will, and the eradication and all others that will come into this particular vote to the tune of 30, I think it is 32 million. I would have had it jotted down, but you know how it is, ma'am, when you're getting young, sometimes you forget. But the amount that the Honorable Prime Minister indicated just now to help to advance Barbados and to give our people a more comforting set of experiences as we go through the COVID and the unemployment that is spiraling. We need to come together as a people and give, share, respect each other to make sure that everybody is happy despite what level they're at. They're safe, they have shelter, they have food, and they have love within the households and in the communities that will spiral across this entire country. I wish to thank you, ma'am, for the privilege.
Thank you. Honorable Member for the City.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again.
Seconder. Question is that I do not report to His Honor the Speaker progress and ask for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. I think the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported progress and asked for leave to sit again. Honorable for City of Bridgetown.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension for lunch until 2:05 p.m.
The question is that this honorable chairman will be suspended for lunch until 2:05 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honorable chairman stands suspended until 5 minutes after 2.